Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area, we're also seen on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. We're going to be meeting with David Bozell, the son of Brent Bozell, conservative think tank guy, also former NFL commissioner. Remember that? Going back a ways.
Absolutely. He's got an organization called For America, and you can find people on there that are not allowed to be on some of the major networks anymore. Some of them have been guests on this show. We think you'll find the conversation interesting. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area, we're also seen on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
I'm political analyst Al Spry. So great to be with you and all our listeners on the 80 stations across Florida, also on Tough TV 38 in Orlando, and occasionally on the Tough TV network nationwide. We appreciate you watching us. We hope that you're enjoying this experiment in video. Yeah. We'll see if it lasts. This TV thing. I think it might be a fad, but you know us. We're on the cutting edge, right?
Yeah, that's right.
If you can't get Tough TV in your market, then call your cable operator or call DirecTV or Dish Network and say, I want my Tough TV. So right now, I want to kick things off with a pod update, Reagan.
Mm-hmm, okay.
We've been covering this a little bit. And,
say what?
I know the smoke is wafting into your studio a little bit. It's getting some memory changes. So it looks like we have this interesting quote from the president. I can't believe I actually find myself agreeing with Obama about something. Obama says that pot is no more dangerous than alcohol. The quote is, I smoked pot as a kid and I view it as a bad habit and a vice, but not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life. I don't think it's more dangerous than alcohol.
I wonder if he's still, during the first term, we saw him sneaking cigarettes, and the word was that Michelle just kind of whack him up behind the ear there and say, you got to quit those cigarettes.
Well, I heard he has quit. That's the understanding. Yeah. Also, John Morgan, who we had on the show about 3 weeks ago, I actually met his goal. He has over 1 million signatures now. The only hurdle standing in his way from this being on the ballot this year as a Florida amendment for medical marijuana is the Supreme Court of Florida.
Yeah, we're waiting to see what they're going to have to say about how the wording of the amendment is composed. Yeah.
So, we're going to have, obviously, David Bozell on. But the Republican Party, and it's not just the Republican Party, the Democrats get their share of wingnuts too, but lately, it seems to be the GOP. So I have to pick on the GOP a little bit. We have a Florida House candidate. His name is Joshua Black. He is calling for President Obama to be hanged. Now, of course, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. This is interesting timing here. This is the candidate for Florida House District 68. And isn't that a crime to call for something to happen to the president? I thought
you'd have to convict him first of something.
This guy says this guy is a complete, not only schmuck, but he's completely crazy.
We'll put you down as neutral.
His quote is, but I love to pull this stuff up because he is running for office. I'm past impeachment. It's time to arrest and hang him high. And of course, this guy is he's a former street evangelist. That tells you something right there, folks. Also, he also works as a taxi driver. I thought Jesus was a peaceful guy. He was saying turn the other cheek. Now, and also he says, and you're going to love this being a history teacher, he said, I think the appropriate punishment is death. They killed Benedict Arnold. Obama shouldn't be allowed to kill Americans without a trial. Except that we didn't kill Benedict Arnold, folks. He died in peace in England at the age of 60, I believe, of dropsy or something like that.
This guy obviously is taking quotes from Joe Biden.
So you, hey, did you see how the former the Secretary of Defense skewered Biden. That was
Oh, yes.
saying that Biden really doesn't know what he's talking about.
And wrong on every issue
Wrong
for the last
on
40
every
years.
Issue.
I have a video that I use in class, images of the 80s, hosted by Peter Jennings. And in one of the presidential election years, Senator Joe Biden is shown in a clip, and this is the show from 1989, going up the Capitol Hill steps saying, well, it was a stupid thing that I did, and I'll probably do a lot more stupid things in years to come. And isn't it ironic that they picked that clip of him in 1989 to put in the images of the 80s show?
Well, you want to know something, one thing about Biden. He's true to his word. You could say that about him.
Yes. All right. Tell you what, on that note, let us take a pause along the network line. We'll remind folks that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
We will be joined by David Bozell when our conversation continues. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are off to the D.C. area where we are joined by David Bozell. And David, welcome to the Florida Roundtable.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Your father has been a guest on this program several times over the years, Brent Bozell.
Yeah, I know that guy. But I don't have the red hair or the red beard, so
okay.
I missed that gene pool.
Well,
I got my mom's prettier genes.
Well, that works. That's a good thing, I guess. Huh? All right. Before we jump into things, folks who are not familiar with you and the family and the background and your organization, as opposed to my sitting here and rattling this all off, how about you go ahead and take the first minute or so and tell us about Act for America and your role.
Sure. Well, everyone knows my father, Brent. He's been fighting the battle against the big bad bullies in the liberal media for, going on 27, 28 years now. And came up with him in the business. And then in 2010, he and myself and a couple of his cohorts in crime were looking across the conservative landscape and determined that what was really missing was a social media voice in the conservative movement, in the construct of the conservative movement. So we aimed to fill that void with For America, and the response has overwhelmed even us. I mean, the thirst for conservative news, views, attitudes on these platforms has been incredible. We have over 4.2 million fans to date in just over 3 years' time. Most of it's all organic. Admittedly, this ain't the Federalist Papers that we're selling. I mean, you can't do that sort of thing on Facebook and some of these other social media platforms. But this is a battlefield, guys, that has been, for the most part, long dominated by the left. And like I said, there's just this. There is a conservative voice out there. It just needed to be tapped into. And folks out there needed to know that they had friends who were self-identified conservatives, and maybe they just didn't know it. And so the whole idea is, and this is something that Obama tapped into, is with social media is the only communication vehicle in the world that provides that peer-to-peer endorsement model. In other words, we don't trust the press, courtesy of my father. We don't trust politicians, obviously. Who do you trust in life? You trust your friends and you trust your family. So it's resulted in a level of activism that has surprised even us and second to none in the movement. So we're real proud of it, and we're going to continue to grow.
What's the basic agenda of it, and where do you find it for America? What's the basic agenda? What are you putting forth? How are you doing it, and where do you find it?
Well, the biggest platform we have is on Facebook itself, so facebook.com/ForAmerica. The website, foramerica.org, is kind of our resume, if you will. All the things that we've done, videos, apps, that kind of thing. What we try to do is marry popular culture, kind of trying to be conservative storytellers, if you will, marrying popular culture to the issues of the day, and trying to keep that engagement level high in the social media universe, so that when you need to kick down some doors on the activist front, like on the defund movement, or like on Cup Cap and Balance in 2011, we were involved with that. When you need to kick down some doors on an issue front, the engagement level is high. You're going to get in people's news feeds and that kind of thing, and people are going to respond. So our wheelhouse is Obamacare, but we're involved in a lot of stuff, immigration, IRS stuff. A lot of issues.
I'm warming to this. I'm pleased because if Al and I stopped and thought about it here, we would be hard-pressed to tell you how many guests we have had on this show who have said to us they are not welcome on MSNBC or they're not allowed to be on CNN anymore because of stands that they have taken. So the alternative is out there.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think my father's been banned.
It's kind of fun to be. It's kind of fun to be banned, isn't it, David? I remember.
That's right. Yeah, imagine that. I mean, but I think every now and again, some rogue producer forgets to check the banned guest list. And they'll get excited, and I'll have to remind them. I don't think your boss would like that too much. Yeah, I mean, it's almost. It's kind of like it's not an entirely new audience, guys, on social media, but because a lot of people are just sort of ditching conventional press, conventional network news, and their ratings have plummeted, and that's a result. And they're going to their phones, they're going to digital platforms. I mean, the fastest growing segment of social media usage is 55 plus. That's why Facebook has doubled basically in the last 5-6 years. The Facebook user is 43% more likely to vote than a non-Facebook user. So these aren't just kids, in their basements, in their parents' basements with potato chips in their laps, sitting around here all day. They're voters. 9 out of every 10 self-identified soccer moms are on Facebook every single day. So Marketing 101 tells you, go to where they are.
Sure.
If every election is the year of the woman, which seems to be that way, go to where women are congregating. So you've got to have a voice. You've got to have a conservative message, a standard bearer, someone carrying the flag, or else the left just comes in and dominates, and you just feel sort of overwhelmed. And sooner rather than later, people just end up throwing up the white flag and saying, "Well, I guess I'll just succumb to liberalism because that's what people want." And it's not the case because there's conservative voices out there, and they're by the millions.
What's interesting about Facebook, from a sociological standpoint recently, you are correct. Facebook was started, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Facebook was started for college kids, and it was a way for them to put their information up and see about other kids who were taking similar classes. And now the young people have actually left Facebook to go to Twitter and other services. And now you have older people, like you had said, coming onto Facebook. So the demographic of Facebook is actually changing quite rapidly. Because once the young kids...
Demographic's changing. Part of it is,
I was going to say...
trying to inspire their kids. So.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say, once the kids find out that the parents are on there now, it loses the cool factor too. So a lot of the kids are leaving too, for that reason as well. But like you said, it opens up that audience for you. Let's move into some issues before we go to our first break. I'd like to first talk about the budget that they finally passed. First of all, I can't believe they passed a budget. Because when's the last time a budget has been passed? 5 years ago? And I think it was Bush who put it together. Yeah. So
the House has passed a couple of its own, but the Senate never took them up. But.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think about that? Considering, and this is a statistic you may have heard, that this is the least productive Congress in American history.
Oh, I don't really care about that kind of stuff. I mean, as a conservative, I'm glad they're not. I'm glad they're going back home and not intruding on my freedoms and passing one law after another. As far as I'm concerned, the least productive, the better.
But what about productivity to roll back laws? You can also have that as well, or to change.
Well, you can.
Laws.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I wish that were the case, and in fact, this Republican House majority pledged in 2010 that if we gave them the majority, that's exactly what they would do. Fast forward a couple of years, and their mantra is, well, we're only 1/3 of one branch, and There's not much we can do. Well, that's not what they said, and it's not up to us to figure out how to do it. They're the elected leaders in Congress. Where the budget's concerned, the biggest gripe that we have is not necessarily the number over $1 trillion, which is astronomically bad. I mean, it's just massive figure. It's really the fact that the Republicans passed this on the House side, going against everything that they promised in 2010. They just were not going to be the party that that negotiated a bill behind closed doors, rushed it to the floor, passed it within a day or 36 hours, wiped the hands of it, and ran home. I mean, that was Pelosi's Congress. That's the kind of stuff that they did, and they promised they wouldn't do that sort of thing. And to have 71% of House Republicans vote for $1 trillion spending bill, when basically a huge majority of them have no idea what's in it. We won't know what's in it. There could be some bad boogie in there that we won't know about for years and years to come. They didn't read it, and they didn't even have the decency to make the sale to the American people. I mean, you're talking about $1 trillion. This stuff just doesn't grow, and it's of our money. And I mean, if Boehner and Pelosi are voting for this thing together, I think these guys should be on a whistle stop tour together and pitching this thing.
Well, what do you think? What do you think happened between 2010 and now to make this change? That's obviously disappointing to you. What do you think is the main factor there?
The leadership is gun shy. They're afraid of their own shadow. They want.
So they're a bunch of. You're saying that the leadership's a bunch of wussies. Then is that pretty much it? Are they just kowtowing or?
Look, these guys, the Republican Party, the upper echelons of the Republican Party leadership in both chambers, we need some new faces. We need people who are going to come up with a game plan that can be executed to advance a conservative agenda, resolving the attendant political and policy issues of the day. And these guys just don't have it. I mean, they wait until the very last minute. They keep conservatives at the table saying they're really, really negotiating hard. And then at the 11th hour, they throw their hands up in the air and they say, well, a deadline's a deadline, and we have to give Obama what he wants. And we can quibble about $10 billion here and $20 billion there, and maybe it's not. Maybe Obama got 99.999% of what he wanted, and so we didn't give him everything. So therefore, it's a win. It doesn't feel like winning. This doesn't feel like a conservative agenda that's being advanced. I mean, how many stories every single day do we hear about government waste with our money? And these guys just don't. They don't have any game plan as to how to deal with it. No one seems to know how to negotiate with Harry Reid. Nobody in that. I mean, he seems to be, the big dog of the mountain, and everybody's House and Senate, the Republican Party just seems to just kowtow to him. And so you gotta stick to your guns, pass them early, attach them to must-pass legislation, and then go make your case to the American people. And go make your sale, and not be afraid of the big bad bullies in the press, who are not going to like you anyway. So just concede that and cede that, and just understand that there is a thirst for a conservative agenda to be advanced, and you just have to tap into it. And the Tea Party and conservative independents will be there and support you.
Tell you what, David, on that note, let us take a pause along our network line here. We'll remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is David Bozell. He is the Executive Director of For America. Find them at foramerica.org or on Facebook. And if you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest today is David Bozell. He is the executive director of For America. Find them at foramerica.org. You can find them on Facebook. And they actually talk to people, probably several of whom have been on this show, as I mentioned earlier, who are not welcome anymore on places like CNN and MSNBC and some of the other regular networks. So, David, thank you for being with us today.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
I'd like to follow up on what we talked about earlier. This budget, and of course, I think I agree with you that we got the president and Senate having the upper hand here. I think a lot of this is related, and I want to get to your reaction to the government shutdown. I don't think people like government shutdowns. I think it polls very badly. Because there's the impression that the Republicans shut it down, and this, of course, this is a replay of what happened in the late '90s, mid to late '90s, also. So I just wondering if this is a turning point. How do you get the focus back? Because right now, the Tea Party is not held in the greatest esteem. Yes, that's a good word. And also we're seeing a lot of kickback, and now finally Republicans, like you said, they seem to be kind of throwing in the towel. What do you think about all that? What's your reaction?
Well, one of the arguments for the Republican Party why they rushed the $1 trillion package was to avoid getting criticized by the Tea Party. So the story of the Tea Party's demise, I think, is grossly exaggerated. On the big picture front, if someone could point to me a poll, and you're right, folks don't like government shutdowns, especially when they're being influenced by the press about how bad they are. But if someone could show me a poll of the tidal wave of momentum that the American people are comfortable having $1 trillion of their money spent without their representatives having any idea as to what they're spending it on, then I'd back down at that point. I'd go find a real job. I just don't. There's no tidal wave of momentum coming from the left that says we absolutely must spend all of this money right now, and the American people are comfortable that we don't know what we're spending it on.
Well, and to put it bluntly, also a lot of this is for defense programs that are backed by conservatives too. So it's not all for left, but the budget is not all for the left. I think the budget is, people have to face the facts that the current welfare state we live in, plus the egregious amount of money that we spend on the military is a big part of it.
Well, I think that if you look at the numbers and the trending over recent years, what is happening is that the budget is being swallowed by entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah. Plus the military budget. They're all equal parts.
The military is not an equal part. It has been shrinking. If you look at NASA, it is minuscule compared to what it was 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, that's NASA.
And it's the entitled program that, and I don't know, David, what are your notions?
Well, the entitlement programs. That's a can that just keeps on getting kicked down the road by both parties. And especially in an election year, nothing's going to be done about them. These things are basically insolvent, and it's a huge problem. But you're right though in the sense that defense, obviously must be paid for, but there can be cuts made in defense as well. There's if we're rational about it, you could find the cuts necessary in defense and show that there's bloated budgets everywhere.
Yes.
And my point is, for the Republicans, it would just be if you pass this stuff early, you paint your vision, you paint your of what the country should look like in terms of having fiscal responsibility, and then you go make your case instead of sitting up here in Washington and wondering and worrying about whether or not Chuck Todd likes you. And at the end of the day, when you have 1,600 pages, over $1 trillion, and basically not a single congressman can admit to actually reading the thing, you have massive problems. And this is exactly what the Republican Party promised they would not do, and they did it anyway.
It's the status quo argument. Everybody wants to do the status quo. Nobody wants to fight the status quo. The last people that tried, you had on the left the Occupy people. On the right, you had the Tea Party people. By the way, those two groups have more in common than most people realize.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And but now you have the status quo winning again. Here's the problem, and here's what frustrates me, and I think frustrates Reagan. We made our bet in this some 20 to 30 years ago by the globalist actions, the treaties, trade going out the window, and now everything's made elsewhere. Not everything. I'm exaggerating slightly, but every time I buy something, it says made in China. When I used to buy something 20 to 30 years ago, it always said made in the USA. Every time you see something made in China, there's jobs lost. We have 60,000 companies that have moved overseas because of the government, okay? Because they made it easy to do so. Now we have the same government who, obviously because of programs that were already in place for some 50 years, we just talked about this a few weeks ago about the Johnson programs, which have been expanded. So now you have government taking a larger and larger role. I think we've crossed a certain Rubicon here, and I don't know how to bring it back. I don't know how you can bring it back at this point. But we have only ourselves to blame here, and that's what frustrates me personally, because it didn't have to be, it did not have to be this way. You did not have to have you did not have to have government taking the place of private industry. Private industry just gave up on America. That's what happened.
Right. I completely agree. It may be too far gone, to be blunt about it. You may not be able to get it back. I mean, the generation sort of behind me, I mean, I'm 35 years old, and I don't know of anyone who speaks about, I mean, what you talked about it being made in America. That was something that you saw on our products, and we had pride in it. And that's just a foreign concept to folks. You know, the generation me, I guess, or millennials, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. They just don't. That's just not in our lexicon anymore, because everything is basically made overseas. Because there's been massive amounts of overregulation. Because it's basically impossible to start a small business nowadays.
It's true.
Without violating some law some law. That's been passed by either the Congress that represents us, or being enacted through a bureaucracy, nameless, faceless bureaucracy that Congress funds. So, I mean, unless and until Congress is going to reassert its constitutional authority over the rule and regulation making process in this country, we might as well have elections to who's going to hold, man the IRS instead of having elections for Congress.
Well, we're pretty much there, because the Congress isn't doing the will of the American people. I have several people. I don't know if you are aware, but there's something in the Constitution called Article 5, which bypasses Congress, and then you have a new constitutional convention where you can actually pass regulation for balanced budgets. We could do that with 34 states. But I don't hear much of a push for that. That was put in by the Founding Fathers as a safety check on government, which is what we have right now.
Yeah, well, you do hear that spoken about. I mean, I just heard that spoken about on two conservative talk radio shows just the other day. And Mark Levin, has his Liberty amendments.
Yeah, that's the book about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there are safeguards. I mean, it does take 34 states, and I know there are arguments where if you did that kind of a thing, it opens up a Pandora's box. I mean, balanced budget would be great. I mean, term limits would be fantastic, which they're not going to vote themselves in term limits. But I mean, balanced budget. You just wish that these guys. You can balance the budget at any time. I mean, there's nothing stopping this Congress or any state assembly, the Florida Assembly, Rick Scott. There's nothing stopping any of these guys from having balanced budgets. It's just whether or not you choose to do it or not. And so to have a law forcing them to do it, I guess, would be nice, but I don't. I guess that opens up a Pandora's box.
They won't do it without. They won't do it without a law. Well, that's the thing. Right?
Florida is one.
You know what? Given the fact that they punted on their constitutional authority on the regulation making process in this country, they might want it. They might want the law forcing tying their hands. They really might. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs.
Florida is one of the
interested in self-preservation.
Florida is one of the few states in the country where we actually have a constitutional amendment that requires a balanced budget. So it doesn't matter which party is in, but we are required to do that. Of course, then we have to watch how they do that. I don't hear people talking about going after the waste. They're proud of the fact that they're slowing down the spending in the years to come. And I go back and I think of the late Everett Dirksen when he was the minority leader, the Republican senator from Illinois. And we'll paraphrase here. I think that he used to say million, but we could say $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. It was a scary thing. Well, it's time for us to pause again along our network line here. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is David Bozell. He is the head of For America. You can find them at foramerica.org. Go to them on Facebook. And if you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is David Bozell of For America, foramerica.org. Find him on Facebook. And David, we know how very busy you are, and we want to say thank you for spending all this time with us today.
Not a problem at all. Enjoyed it.
As you alluded to, Republicans are leaving the fold. The conservative Republicans, they're fed up. The Tea Party got neutered by the Republican Party establishment. So what do conservatives do now? Do they form a third party? I'm thinking maybe it's time for a third party. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's tough to do. I mean, the Republican and Democrat parties have the system sort of stacked in their favor. So it's almost darn near impossible. I prefer taking over the Republican Party from within and advocating for new leadership and some fresh faces who are going to advance a conservative agenda. And then, I mean, one of the post-mortem reports out of the 2012 race was that a number of conservatives just stayed home because Romney's message didn't appeal to them. Now that could be also sort of the libertarian group among the Republican Party, who just says a pox on both your houses. Just don't bother me. But I would prefer advancing a conservative agenda through the Republican Party with the Republican Party. I don't necessarily agree that the Tea Party influence has been neutered. I mean, this was one bill. This is 1 year, one appropriations bill, and they're going to have to answer to their constituents when they go back home. And they're going to be spending a lot of time at home this year. There's only about 100 days, legislative days in the calendar. So these guys are going to be campaigning a lot. And I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think these guys are going to go to their town hall meetings, and their base, who put them in the majority in 2010, are going to say, can you name me a conservative legislative achievement since you've been in power? And I don't think they can.
I want to switch gears slightly because we have the Super Bowl coming up in a couple weeks. And it turns out we have Seattle, Washington versus Denver, Colorado. Are they going to call this the Pot Bowl? Is this...
I know, that's what the judge...
The Stoner Bowl.
The Stoner Bowl.
Stoner Bowl.
What are your thoughts about the legalization and marijuana initiatives that are happening across the country? What are your personal thoughts on it?
I am all for the 50-state experiment. So if that issue falls into that wheelhouse, where states are able to decide for themselves what they want legal and what they don't, obviously, with some exceptions, but this is, I'm all for the 50-state experiment. So let Colorado go for it, and we'll see where the chips fall. Let Washington go for it, and we'll see where the chips fall. And if Oregon doesn't want to do it, well, that's Oregon's prerogative. Yeah. So, as a guy who would love to see more power return to the states, because I think it fosters competition, and I think it fosters ingenuity and innovation. Let these states, try and experiment what works for them.
Let me ask you one final question here, and I wonder, sometimes I think perhaps I see the beginnings of history repeating itself. Out of World War II and the years thereafter, the Democrats and Republicans were sort of the Me Too, I agree with them, except I can do it better. And there wasn't 5 cents worth of difference. And then along comes Barry Goldwater, 1964. Yes, he suffers a horrible defeat, but the new ideas were out there, the choice not an echo. And by 1964, he only carries like 5 states. And by 1968, the Republicans have come back. They win. And by 1980, Ronald Reagan is winning in a landslide. Over those years, 68, 72, the Democrats slipped farther and farther to the left. And the Clintons trying to pull it back towards the center and not doing all that well. And now we have a president who is, once again, skewing hard left. And endorsed by Ted Kennedy and everybody on the left, wanted nothing to do with the Clintons. And so I wonder, are we seeing the beginnings of history repeating itself here?
I think so. The conditions are ripe for exactly that kind of candidate who's going to be singing a little bit of a different tune. He's going to be talking about personal freedom, personal liberty, not trying to count out to the echo chamber. A populist candidate who wants to get government off your back. I think that the conditions are ripe for it. Ted Cruz comes to mind. Even Rick Perry, if he wanted to try again, I think he probably will throw his hat into the ring. It may take a couple of elections to get that done, but you got to start somewhere. It's one of the things that I think the Republican Party needs to remedy is carrying the Republican flag in major population centers. I mean, the Republicans are trying to win statewide races with one hand tied behind their back because they don't put up a candidate in a lot of major cities because they think they just can't win. Well, even if you can't win, you got to have somebody carrying the torch and going into these communities. So I think you're absolutely right. It's the conditions are favorable for that kind of a sea change.
David Bozell, unfortunately, the clock tends to run a little bit too fast on us. We get into some of these conversations, but that does give me the opening to invite you to come back and do this again soon with us. We certainly appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. Anytime. We'll get my dad on, too.
Yeah, we would
get
love
Dad
that.
on, too.
Yeah. For America, foramerica.org. Check them out on Facebook. And, David, again, we thank you so much, and we look forward to your next visit. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
This is the Florida Roundtable, and we'll have a closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in Orlando of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And to take it home today, a couple of other topics that really are still front page.
Well, we have winner and loser of the week. The winner of the week here in Florida is David Jolly, an obscure federal lobbyist and former aide to the late C.W. Bill Young. Suddenly looks like he could well be the next congressman in a seat long coveted by countless more prominent Pinellas Republicans. You have to admire the chutzpah of a Washington insider running against Washington. The loser of the week, Jack Latvala, the Republican kingmaker and state senator from Clearwater, scrounged for another Republican to deny the GOP nomination to Jolly. Not only did his client, Kathleen Peters, get stomped, but at Jolly's victory party, former St. Pete Mayor Rick Baker declared Latvala nemesis Jeff Brandes Florida's best state senator. That's a little bit of an ouch right there. So there's your winner and loser. Also, this NSA reform speech by Obama, I'd like to briefly hit on this. There was not much reform promised here.
No.
Obama with an order, a presidential order, could stop this mass collection of data. I watched Face the Nation, and the apologists for the NSA are basically saying no abuse. One guy said no abuses were done. The other guy said, yes, there were some abuses, but they weren't systemic, which basically means he's calling the first guy a liar. That's an abuse. Even if it's one guy, it's still an abuse of the setup.
I think the whole business, like so many times has happened in our history, here's this call for a commission, and all these senators and people get together and they make all of these recommendations, and then the president promptly turns around and ignores 90% of them, puts them all on the shelf. So window dressing.
More status quo.
Yeah, I think so. Well, regrettably, Al, once again, the clock has caught up with us, but we do invite your comments. You can send us an email. You can check us out on Facebook. You can, send us a snail mail if you want to. We still get those around here, too. So we'll say thank you for your time this day. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we'll see you again in 1 week with another edition of the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.